Alright, so we're doing our presentation on sports participation and the risk factors involved. Sports are a massive part of society, especially nowadays where so many people are trying to pursue it, either for professional career. It gives such a building block for the development of people, especially younger kids. Like it tells you how to teach you to be work with other people, how to lead, how to accept defeat, how to win with success. The dedication, the effort that you have to put in, the time and energy to like develop yourself, and that's a massive thing. A lot of people end up pursuing it for a number of reasons, whether it be for fun, developing friends, life skills, or for the love of the game. The pressure to perform has gotten so big nowadays, especially with college being the new like professional frontier and the stepping stone for further success. Parents invest a lot of money in travel and club teams, and so they expect a whole lot of results. And coming from overseas, where it's not so game orientated, like you'll train 2 times a week and you play on the weekend. You might be, at my peak, I was training 4 or 5 times a week, and then I had 3 games on the weekend. That was the most. But here, it's just as many games as you can, and it's not uncommon to have like 300 games in a season, which it's just very very intense. This drive that kids are seeing now when they're younger, as sports become more professionalized, has created this threshold that kids are perfecting and professionalizing themselves at a very young age. So instead of when you're younger and you're playing multiple different sports and you become multi-sport, you're nowadays everyone's very focused on one sport. The issue with that you get with younger age and professional development at a young age is you get very related, sports related players that are starting to show these signs of injuries from sport specific injuries. And that kind of repeats itself. But and what we're trying to say here is that an athlete that is involved in multiple sports might have a little bit more flexibility, but with this you see a lot more wear and tear due to repetition, high repetition. In certain sports you see a lot of leg injuries, in soccer at least. The hamstrings can usually be really tight, quads are the same thing, calves. You just see the same ankle injuries are very common, and then with that, on top of that, in the constant playing, it just can create that environment of a constant repetition for injury. Um, and like once you injure yourself and then you kind of pursue a little bit more, it gets worse and worse, and the recovery is so much harder. Um, One thing that I think parents and players alike need to understand is that there are a massive number of unique risks when you're playing sport. When you compete, especially in collegiate, not just collegiate, but like in all sports in general, the risk is so much greater. The higher up the level you get, the more professional, the more desire that players have, the more aggressive it is because it's so much more competitive. There's more risk. There's more risk and unique risk for injuries. I think the most amount of time I'll come over here and like the most amount of people that have what do you call it ACL injuries is unreal. I've never seen so many people injured like that in my life. Back home it's such a rare injury, but over here it's common. Concussions is massive in America. Where back home I couldn't even really tell. I know one guy that had quite a few concussions. That was it. But over here, I think everyone's had concussions at some point or knows of it, and so that's just kind of like a big eye opener in terms of like injuries that you might not deal with overseas, but you face a lot here. Um, a lot of trauma is another thing that's very big, and it can be spontaneously, it can be on purpose, um, just depending on the sport. I know, like with soccer, you face a lot of trauma in terms of like there's a lot of contact. Sometimes the tackle was done and it's wrong, and so these are some of the issues that people need to be aware of. The other big one that's come into play, and not a lot of people know much about it, is cardiac arrest issues. As there are a lot of undiagnosed issues that a lot of people don't understand or don't know about, and the way that it can affect athletes on the field is very spontaneous. And how do you deal with it? It's something that you never expect, never something you expect to happen, but it happens. And especially when it's undiagnosed, like when you have diagnosed conditions, you're aware, you can deal with it, and if it's a very serious career that they're not able to participate. But undiagnosed are the worst spontaneous ones, and they are very common and they happen a lot. And that's the risk that takes place with that. um, while saying that universities have to take all precautions necessary to prevent athletes from facing these risks, some of these preventions that are in place are rigorous, medical testing for athletes. That is one of the biggest ones that they do to try to take care of themselves, is by making sure that they're going through the steps to make sure athletes are taken care of and that they are healthy, that they are able to participate without the risk of injury or death. Constant AT presence is a massive one at trainings, and smaller schools don't have that ability and flexibility to have them at every training session, which in itself is a liability issue. But having ATs within presence and distance is the only way that you can prevent a lot of these, if they happen, from death. If cardiac arrest and the coach or the AT is like 500 feet away, you're expecting your coaches and players to react. Saying that, coaches I think need to be trained in CPR. They need to be very updated and relevant with it within the year, because if something happened, I mean, all of us are trained, but would I say that we are all confident to deal with a cardiovascular injury? Would we be comfortable knowing it? Probably not. If we're thrown in that situation, and that's scary that you might be thrown into that situation where you have to react. But you are trained to try and at least be knowledgeable in the sense that you can practice it and help out. There are many steps we take in preventing injuries for athletes. The worst thing you can happen is an injury that takes place. This is just something that you have to inform parents about when they come in, that there are risks. There are, anything can happen, but we are promising that we are doing everything we can to limit the risks that can happen. And that's the promise that we're trying to make to them, that while their kids are in our care, we are trying to do everything we can in our power to limit the risk of injury or death. But there are some things that are out of our hand that we can't help, and they have to be aware that there are cases where things may happen and we have no control over it. And that's the biggest thing for parents that we need to talk to about and make sure that they are knowledgeable, that it's not just roses and fairies. There is risk. And every time you get in the field, there is risk of injury and death. But yeah.